So yeah, let's go ahead and get started, Ron.
All right, let's go. All right, everyone, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about upskilling and reskilling for the energy transition. The issue is we've identified that there are issues, we know there are issues, and as we change away from fossil fuels and we get into renewable fuels, we see that some of the skills that are going to be needed are going to be a little bit different. And that means our workforce is going to have different skills, and that means we are going to have to make sure they have those skills before they start work. So let's get started anyway, and let's do some introductions. Okay, let me introduce myself. My name is Ron Friend. I'm based in the UK. I'm in England. I work with the Alliance, used to be called Petroskills. I'm VP of Net Zero and Renewables. Specifically responsible for greenhouse gas community. I do have a master's from Huddersfield University, and that is focusing on um, well, it was heat flow in buildings. So basically, just trying to optimize heating efficiency. And it says 40 years experience in the energy industry. Pretty soon, that's going to be about 50. Okay, so that's me. So Brandon, come on, tell us about
Sure.
yourself.
Thanks, Ron. My name is Brandon Grosvenor, and I'm responsible for business development in the net zero and renewable sectors at the Competency Alliance. So I work very closely with our community managers, along with Ron, and our member companies and clients to look at different strategies and solutions for skilling across the energy industry. So I've been working in the energy sector for about 18 years now in various roles in training, competence, learning and development, as well as business development and sales, and have been with the Competency Alliance for about 2 years. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, Ron. We'll talk about the agenda.
Okay, do you want to run us through the
Yeah,
agenda?
yeah. I'll go ahead and do that. So we're certainly really excited to have all of you that have joined us here today. And so our aim is to offer some insights into skilling strategies across energy sectors. And so today, first we'll start off by kind of defining the problem. We'll talk a bit about climate change and its implications on the energy industry. Then we'll shift a bit and we'll focus the discussion on people, skills, and job roles. And ultimately, we'll dive into some proven methods and approaches that we've implemented along with many of our clients and member companies to develop people for roles in net zero and renewable energies. So that's what we'll cover today. And then Ron, on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the Competency Alliance and what we do. So the Competency Alliance, you'll see here, we have solutions for the development of people across the energy industry. Top right, you see we have competency management and consultants, where we bring in our expertise and competency specialists to work with organizations to look at their operational needs, look at different standards for training and for development, as well as technical standards in the industry, and work with them to build frameworks and implementation plans for learning and development. We have our own training and development solutions. So these products go across various modalities from instructor-led training, instructor-led virtual learning. We have e-learning, and we also have blended programs. And finally, we have software solutions which help us implement and manage both competency programs and frameworks, as well as a learning management system and a competency management system to help companies organize their learning, deploy their learning, and also track and implement competence management programs. Next slide, please, Ron. Okay, there we are. um, so the Competency Alliance was formed over 20 years ago as Petroskills. And the game really, or the aim was to help oil and gas companies develop critical skills and knowledge in the geoscience disciplines initially. And since then, they added multiple disciplines across not only upstream oil and gas, but also midstream refining and petrochemical. In 2023, we founded our net zero renewable sectors to begin to identify both transferable and new skills and knowledge requirements, as well as uh, programs to build performance ready professionals across energy mix. So here we outline the sectors that we are now working in. Within the net zero skills division, we're working in greenhouse gas management, which Ron leads. We're also working in carbon capture and carbon sequestration, as well as hydrogen. In the renewable skills division, we've established communities around geothermal, around biofuels and bioenergies, and circular economy. And over the last really year or so, we've really been focused on developing our competency maps, identifying uh, key skill gaps, and developing content to help close those gaps. And as such, over the last year, we've released about 110 hours of digital learning to support growth and development in these new sectors. Next slide, please, Ron. All right. And so before we go any further, we'll just cover a couple of legal disclaimers that we have here. We'll let the audience go ahead and review those. All right. So now that that's covered, we'll go ahead and turn it over to Ron. So, Ron, all yours.
Okay. What I'd like to do is I'd like to start on just with a little poll. And what I'm going to ask you guys to do, can you check out your cell phones and have a look at that QR code up there? When you click on that QR code, that should give you a link to get into this Slido. And what I'm going to ask you to do then is using one word, just one word, not a whole sentence. What does the energy transition mean to you? Now, I've put one word in here already, and for me, it's change. And what we should end up with is a word map. And let's just see what's the most practical, see what people think is going to affect them. Oh, yes, I like that. Complexity and opportunity. Absolutely. Progress. Oh, it is dynamic. You wouldn't believe how dynamic this whole situation is. Or maybe you would. It surprises me every day when I look out and I see what's happening. But you're right there. It is difficult. And that's partly because it is so dynamic. Misunderstood, transformation, sustainability. These are all good words, guys. And yes, there are challenges. Okay, there's a lot going on here, guys. And what I would like to do now is I'm going to move on. You'll all have a copy of, you'll have access to the PDF of all these slides. That will include this word map as well. And I just really find it interesting. And every one of those words is just so apt. There's not a single word there that is out of place. And that is part of a problem. What we need to do now is to look at the problem, see what the problem actually is, see what the solutions are that have been put in place, and then look at the opportunities that those solutions give us. But those solutions and those opportunities also create complexity and they create further problems. So thanks, guys. I really appreciate you guys doing that. So let's dive on. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start looking at the problem, just a little bit about this, because there's a lot talked about the greenhouse effect, climate change, global warming, and so on. And that's what's driving this whole thing about renewable energy and net zero. But what actually is it? What is the greenhouse effect? Well, we can see that on the natural greenhouse effect, which is what we want, this is what we'd like to have, we've got heat coming from the sun. Now, the temperature of the surface of the sun is about 5,000, 5,500 Celsius. And that means that the energy coming off the sun, the light, the infrared radiation, has got a lot of energy. It's high frequency, small wavelength, and that means it can punch right through any CO2, it can punch through a lot of clouds, a lot of water vapor, and lands onto the earth. It warms up the earth. Then what happens is, because the surface of the earth on average is about 15 Celsius, the heat emitted from that is a lot less. So a lot of that heat is reflected up into space, but it means that quite a bit of the heat stays in here, but there's a balance with the real greenhouse effect. We want a little bit of greenhouse effect because some of that heat will go up into the clouds, into the CO2 in the atmosphere. It will warm that up, and that moisture and that CO2 itself warms up, and that will emit heat, some of it to space, some of it back to Earth. And that helps create the balance. So that is a good thing. If we did not have a greenhouse effect, this planet would be a ball of ice, and we certainly don't want that. The problem we've got is that with a lot more CO2 in the atmosphere, a lot of that heat being emitted from the Earth now heats up the CO2, it heats up the moisture in the atmosphere, and a lot less of it is emitted into space. That means more of it is pushed back into the Earth. And that is an accelerated greenhouse effect. And that is our problem. So what we've got to think about is, what causes this? Is there something we can do about it to help make things easier? Now, just looking about in history, and we've just titled that, so what's all the fuss? What we have seen is that there is a relationship between CO2 in the atmosphere and temperature. And if you look at the global temperature, and this is in degrees Celsius deviation from now, there's everything's been fairly steady for about the last 2,000 years. There have been ups, there have been downs. But since the industrial age started, there has been a marked increase in CO2, which makes sense because, if we're burning coal, we're burning oil, we're burning gas, it does emit a lot of CO2. But what we have seen is, as these temperatures, as CO2 goes up, the temperatures have gone up with them. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that the issues with the CO2, it's not only CO2. What we've got is a myriad of greenhouse gases. And if you look at the map here, we can see that carbon dioxide is about 65% of greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a lot. But we have a lot of methane. In fact, that 65% is just fossil fuel and industrial. We got another 11% from forestry and land use, methane 16%, and a few others. Methane is difficult because a lot of the emissions of methane are anthropogenic, and all that means is man-made. That's all it means. So some of it will be coming from gas leaks, natural gas leaks. Some of it will be from unburned fuel. Some of it actually comes from cattle. The issue that we've got to think about is, what can we do to actually try and reduce the effect of the CO2 in the atmosphere? Now, I'm not going to get too heavily into the link between CO2 and global warming. That can be for another time. But around the world, governments, United Nations, have decided there is a link. And let's see what we can do. Well, let's see what the problem is. The worst that could happen, temperatures are going to rise. I mean, temperatures are rising. Now, I've seen people say, well, nothing's happened in the last couple of years. Well, things have happened in the last couple of years. But if you need to be looking at this over an average of about 10 years, and you'll see that on average, things are definitely warming up. Phosphorus season and growing season will lengthen. Yeah, that's true. Because if it's warmer, you can have more crops, which is a good thing. Um, Changes in precipitation patterns. I mean, we've just seen recently, just in the last couple of days, the tragic events in Texas. And it's not unusual now. It's happening more and more. We saw things happen in Spain quite recently with massive precipitations. And as global warming happens, as the temperature of the seas increase, you get more moisture evaporating and it goes into the earth. It's got to come down somewhere. But what we're also seeing is droughts and heat waves. We will see hurricanes are becoming stronger. Hurricanes will be more intense because there's more energy in the sea because the sea's warmer. Sea levels will rise several feet by the end of the century. That means we're going to have some problems on some of the sea towns. We've got some problems with some low-lying islands. And we know that this is happening. A lot of governments around the world are investing in sea defences. Even where I live, quite closely, I live about 1 kilometre from the beach. And our government has spent a lot of money on sea defences there. And I'm glad they did. The Arctic's likely to become ice-free. That's going to happen quite soon. But things are going to change. That's the issue. All right, enough about the problem. What are we doing about it? What we are doing is we've got these different technologies. We've got solar technologies, we've got wind, we've got carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, geothermal, all of them. And there are so many because what we're trying to do is we're trying to replace the fossil fuels which are emitting these greenhouse gases and replace them with something that does not. Now, what that leads to is opportunities. And what we have seen is with solar power generation, the cost of the solar panels has decreased dramatically. I'm sure you've seen there's so many adverts now, people trying to sell you solar panels to put on your house. They were a lot cheaper than they were 10 years ago. And not only for domestic applications, but also for industrial applications. Wind turbines, there's a lot more of them. And if wind turbines are out there, they've got to be looked after. That means more maintenance. And just the installation of the wind turbines can be problematic. In carbon capture and storage, this is being driven mainly by governments. So the government is now giving us targets on how much CO2 we can emit and how much CO2 we can store. This will probably become more important as a cost and a value is put against every ton of CO2. And as we see the value of a ton of CO2 hitting about $100, then you'll see that it becomes actually commercially viable to do more carbon capture and storage. Hydrogen is a big thing at the moment. It's going up and down a little bit, but we'll see what happens with hydrogen. Geothermal, definitely. Watch out for this one, guys. Geothermal is going to be a big one. What we're just looking into recently is bioenergy and circular economy. We've started a couple of new communities out there. There's a lot of, well, bioenergy is quite straightforward. It means that we're actually growing material, growing corn, and we're producing renewable gas, renewable aviation fuel, and so on, sustainable aviation. In greenhouse gas management, just about every business in the world needs to be looking at greenhouse gas management because we all have to do greenhouse gas emissions reporting. The issue is with all of these, every one of these technologies, they are opportunities, but also means that the skill sets to be able to work these opportunities, to be able to work these technologies, are not the same as we had with fossil fuels. Now, there are risks, and we've seen around the world that political decisions have been changing. We've seen what's happened in the US. Australia's been changing quite a bit. We are seeing the issues with the politics is affecting the regulatory frameworks. The investment environment is changing somewhat. It's very, very in a state of flux. And what we're seeing now is, even just 3 or 4 years ago, there was a lot of investment planned in hydrogen plants, and a lot of people are pulling that back now because of the costs associated with hydrogen. Workforce, this is the big one. This is what really we want to be talking about. There is a skill match between the skills that people have now and the skills that people are going to be needing in the new energy technologies. And that's what we've got to address. People are going to be moving around. And this thing about policy lag, unfortunately, this also depends a lot on political leadership. It depends on the leadership within large companies. Can they actually do this? We got our infrastructure timeline, bottlenecks, permit delays, local resistance, and you're going to see more and more of that. With the technology risk, shifting government priorities disrupt R&D pipelines and the cost of the technology. These are all risks, guys. I'm not trying to cover anything over. There are opportunities, there are risks. What we need to do is to look at one of those risks and see what we can do about it, and that's going to be workforce development. Now, the issue is the energy transition is expected to generate millions of new jobs by 2030. And I'll dive into some of these numbers on the next slide. Fossil fuels expected to lose over 2 million jobs by the end of the decade, but that's going to be taken over by all of these other technologies, all these other jobs. Now, if we see this, what we've done here is we've looked at different sectors. So we've got renewable energy, electric vehicles and battery manufacturing, fossil fuels, energy efficiency, grid and storage, power, circular economy, and transitional energy. Now, if you look at the top row, this is showing millions of people in the workforce. There are two other rows below that. One is steps. Now, what that is the current policy that companies and countries are working with right now. If you look at the APS, these are the announced pledges. The announced pledges are what governments have said they will do by 2050 to achieve net zero. Nobody, not a single country in the world, is close to that announced pledge. So let's concentrate on steps, the current policies that countries and companies are actually working with right now. Even in renewable energy, even with steps, that means we're going to need 10 million more jobs. Electric vehicles and batteries, 3 million. We're going to lose some on fossil fuels. We got more on energy efficiency. We've got 3 million more in grid and storage, 1 million more in power generation, 2 million in circular economy, and so on. It means that there's going to be a lot of people needed. And if you add all these together, this is a net increase under steps of 17 million people in the global workforce. That's not to be sneezed at. That's a lot of people. What we did next, we looked at various sectors. And we said, well, okay, well, what sort of people are we employing in these sectors? Now, this row here, this top row, this is the current dominant roles. So obviously, we're not going to put all of them in there. But like for power generation, we got coal plant operators, grid dispatchers, gas turbine engineers. If we go to the renewable roles, this is going to change. We're going to need a lot fewer coal plant operators, but we are going to need a lot of solar photovoltaic installers. We're going to need wind turbine technicians and so on. And I'm not going to go through all of these. You can feel free to peruse this at your leisure when you get the PDF. Suffice to say that the job roles are changing, and that is the issue. Okay, so we said that the job roles are going to change, but there's something in there that we need to look at. If we look at the skill levels, if we've gone low skilled, medium skilled, or high skilled. Low skilled, repetitive manual tasks. medium skilled vocational or tech education, so technicians, operators, highly skilled engineers and technician graduates. And if we look at the numbers here, at the moment, well, certainly in the general economy by 2030, 58% of the workforce will need to be medium skilled. And in the energy sector, that's 51%. And if you look at the high skilled, in the energy sector, that's going to go up to 36%, 27% in the general economy. Keep an eye on that. Right. I'll read this quote, and I don't mind reading it because it's valid. The share of job postings requiring at least one specialized digital skill has more than doubled in some countries and sectors. And in Canada, for example, this share surpassed 50% in 2023 for solar, PV, and efficiency jobs. And that was less than 20% a decade ago. Things are already changing. Now, a lot of times people talk to me about, is this the same as the big crew change? Because in the oil and gas industry, uh, we had a fairly big change in that decade between 2010 and 2020. But that was 700,000 people needing upskilling and reskilling. And that was in the fossil fuel industry, oil and gas. As we progress through the transition, IEA estimates more than 20 million people globally. Now, we said 17 million because we lowballed it. But this is a number that the International Energy Association estimates, more than 20 million people. Now, don't forget, that's new job roles plus retiree replacements. So even if you got some people in those new job roles, some of them are going to retire. That's a huge job, isn't it? How can you do it? And you look at this, you think millions of people, all these hundreds of different job roles. Well, somebody once said to me, how do you eat an elephant? And the way you eat an elephant, it's just one bite at a time. And the point of this is don't try and take everything on all at once. What we need to do is to define a process. So we go through the process step by step. And that's what we're doing here. I'm sure some of you have heard of the phrase, go for the low-hanging fruit first. In this case, the low-hanging fruit is to try and identify those workers who have a skill set which is close to the skill set you need in the new job roles. And what we've found, of course, it's if you've got fewer things to do, fewer changes, fewer skills that you have to implement into this new person, it's easier to retrain. If you're talking with somebody who actually has no skills, you're going to spend a lot more time and a lot more money training those people. So the thing to do first of all is look to see what skill sets you already have and then work on that. Make life easier for you. Remember the elephant, one little bite at a time. Right, so here's the process. First of all, identify the relevant disciplines. So look at the skills and competencies you need within that discipline. Identify the new job roles. Now, we've been a little bit cheeky here because we said, maybe you're going to get somebody who has no experience whatsoever. So if that person has no experience, maybe he's working down the road at a fast food restaurant. And that's fine. And that is actually happening in the Permian right now. We are getting people with no skills. And we're trained, they're working with colleges, community colleges, to actually give those people a set of skills and they can go out into the workforce. But because they need a lot more skills, you need to start early. If you can start them at the community college level, let them get the basics, and then within the company, once they have a certain skill set, then you can develop on that. Right, so we got the existing job roles, and what we got is upskilling and reskilling. Upskilling is what we just talked about with the guy working in the in the burger joint. Reskilling means taking someone who has a set of skills and then we can give them new proficiencies. So we got the guy here, and we now know if we know what his skill set is, we can do a gap analysis between that skill set and the skill set for the new job role. Identify those skill gaps for that individual, and then you can develop an upskilling plan. Now, I put this quotation in here, and this is from Shell, from a lady called, Liz Sturman. She was Shell's Vice President of Development and Subsurface Excellence. And what she said was around 65% of the traditional oil and gas skill set, including business and integration skills, can be immediately used for the energy transition, immediately. Another 30% are applicable with some adaptation. Only 5% were deemed non-transferable. Now, of course, it does depend on what roles you're putting these people into, but it means that there is a massive opportunity here. Okay, so let's get into an example. So what we've done is, Brandon already mentioned about the different communities, the different sectors that we have. And one that I have specific responsibility for is greenhouse gas management. Now, one of the things that we've done there with each of the communities, each of the sectors, we've developed a competency map. So what competencies do people need to be able to work in this sector? And we just toned them down into a few areas. So we got carbon capture and storage, utilization. We got the management of the gas. We got climate change, understanding climate change, technical equipment, and business. And then we looked at these individual skills and we identified how many of these skills there are. And there are quite a few. So anybody working in the greenhouse gas management sector I would expect them to have at least some of these skills, depending on the job role that they need within that area. Now, here's an example of the competency map that we're talking about. Now, we can look at here as an example. A skill name is thermodynamics. Then we got an overview of CO2 capture, post-combustion capture, and so on. And notice then we've got different levels. We've got awareness, fundamental, skilled, and mastery. Now, depending on what your job is, let's say you're just coming into the workforce, perhaps you're an apprentice. You would not be expected to be fully skilled in most of these competencies. It may well be that you just need to have an understanding of what someone else is doing in a different job role. So that would be, you would need an awareness level of that particular skill. But if you're actually working in that arena and you're actually providing reports, you're actually doing assessments, you probably will be doing that under supervision. In that case, you would need a fundamental application. You need to know more than the awareness level. If you're actually perhaps a lead, then you need to be skilled at that job. That means you can do the job without supervision. If we get to mastery, not everyone will need mastery. At mastery level, you're probably teaching someone about it. So you are recognized as an expert in your field. Now, what we then did, we said, okay, well, let's look at some of these job positions that people are going to be working at within the greenhouse gas sector. And we looked at an environmental engineer, an analyst, an auditor, and a specialist. And then what we did was we said, well, at what level of skill does an environmental engineer need these skills? And so on. So what this is doing, this is defining the skill set a person needs when they're actually running into that job, when they're actually starting that work. Now, the next stage we did, we went in more detail and we said, okay, for all of these different jobs, how many skills Do I need an awareness, the fundamental, the intermediate, or the mastery? Uh, we've got foundation, intermediate there on the previous slide that was shown, um, fundamental and skilled. It's the same thing. Now, if you look at this, at the bar chart on the side, what you can see is that if you look at the yellow means mastery. The dark purple is just awareness level. And if you look at these different jobs, they need different mix of skills. Not everybody needs to be an expert in every skill level. It depends on what the job role is that you're actually employing these people to do. And that again means that we need to go a little bit deeper. It's no good just saying, well, I need to know a little bit about um, carbon capture. Well, what about the carbon capture do you need to know? At what level of that carbon capture do you need to know? Is it the case that this person only needs to know that some carbon has to be taken out of a flue gas? Or does this person need to know what is the right type of amine to use? Or maybe they're not even using an amine. Maybe they need to be the person who actually decides what is the right sort of technology to use here. So it's complicated. So what we did, we looked at this CMAP. We carried out a job level review on the new job role. We identify the skills and the skill levels needed. And then we look for the identified skills in a previous job role. Now, once you've got those two, now it becomes a fairly simple job to say, look, well, these things are missing. These are the skill gaps. Now, once you've got the skill gaps identified, then you can now go out and say, well, okay, what do I need to do to make sure this person has these skills? Now, a lot of the time that is going to be training. Now, it could be different types. It may be that it could do some e-learning. Perhaps this person needs on-the-job training. It depends on what the actual job is. It depends on what the skill levels are. And just to finish off, just one example. So in our imaginary workforce, we said, all right, we need a greenhouse gas emissions analyst. And on one of the previous slides, we've shown the skills that are needed to be able to do that job. And then we've said, okay, well, these are the skills that that person needs. Now, we've got these people, an environmental engineer, an HSE officer, or an energy analyst. And these people are applying for this job. Who would be the best fit? Well, let's have a look. Well, the environmental engineer, if he has a tick, that means he has these skills. Now, in this case, he has some skills. The drivers between capture process selection, a little bit. Sometimes he needs a bit about cost estimation. If he's a consultant, he might need more about low temperature CO2 capture and so on. So there actually is quite a good fit here between the environmental engineer and the greenhouse gas emissions analyst. If we go to the HSE officer, no, not such a good fit really. Because this person, well, to do a job of HSE officer, we don't need these three skills at all. So I may not have learnt them. They may not be in my skill set. If I look at the energy analyst, not bad, not bad. A couple of things where there are skill gaps. And that means we'd have to do some work with that person to fill those skill gaps. So if we said we're going to go with the energy analyst, and we said, okay, he doesn't have this skill, the use of low temperature for CO2 capture. With skill gap remediation, well, we've identified there are a couple of training courses this person could go on that would get that person up to that skill level. And the same for looking at PFD, P&ID codes and specifications for fuel gas system design. Do some training on process utilities. That's really what it is. Now, if this person, this energy analyst, does this sort of training, and then they say, well, now I have the necessary skills to be able to do that job of a greenhouse gas emissions analyst. You're done. And that means your life is a lot easier. Now, all you need to do, as we said, if we just go through it again, identify what the skills are needed in the new job. Look at the person who's coming in, identify the skills that they already have. And if you already have competency maps and this person is already in your organization, you should have that. You should know what those skills are. That's part of your responsibility as a learning and development person or as a human resource person. It should be within your arena. And that means it's quite an easy job to do that skill gap analysis. So, in conclusion, and we're almost on time, we can say that the energy transition is evolving, and it really is evolving. Um, you know, I'll just go through these, and I've got a question for you, Brandon, because I know you're all excited now. Um, this thing about the energy transition evolving, it's that word map that we started off with. It's it's mind blowing. The things that are going on. Um, I see changes in technology on almost a daily basis. I get emails coming in on new developments. Those new developments eventually will turn into new technologies. And those new technologies mean new job roles. So that evolution is an issue. And that means the workforce is going to have to be reskilled or upskilled. These are some of the issues now. The priorities are continually shifting. We do have uncertainty, and that means you have to be able to adapt within your company. So I think what we're saying here is even if you do a gap analysis, it's not good enough to say, well, I've done a gap analysis for that job and that job. It's going to change. You have to keep on top of this. But what we do know is that the skills across the energy sectors are widely transferable. Now, I know, Brandon, you were in Canada recently, and I think you're going to know what I'm going to ask you. Um, you saw some examples of reskilling in practice.
Yeah, and I can touch on those a little bit. I think from the conclusions we have here, um, it's really interesting to see some of the dynamics over the last 6 to 12 months in terms of where investment is or was, and then how it's shifting, right?
Right.
And ultimately, in the conversations we have with our customers and folks we're working with, it really comes down to that investment in new technologies, or maybe even shifting back investment into what would be their traditional core business, impacts their talent strategy, impacts the learning and development strategy. And what companies are looking to do is continue to develop their people in an effective and efficient manner. And so,
Yeah.
when you touched on the transferability of skills, that's something that companies are really looking at. So, just a couple of examples that I've come across recently. There was a company that was converting a refinery into a biofuels refinery, and part of the
Hmm.
exercise that they went through is, first and foremost, they had to look at their project management organization and really ensure that they understood the nuances of biorefining, understood all the equipment, all the processes, things like that. And so they went through an analysis similar to what you showed, looking at the core skills and competencies of their project management group, and then started to identify the next new skills and competencies that were going to be required, looking at a biorefinery. Um, Created that gap analysis and then created a plan in which they implemented. And we've seen a kind of a similar approach company that we were working with. Upstream oil and gas company had their subsurface team. Is traditionally focused on exploration and production. They shifted that focus a bit to look into CCUS, and so that subsurface team is really focused on carbon sequestration. Very similar
Hmm.
skills, looking from a geoscience perspective, but looking at a different application. right?
Yeah.
And what was really interesting is they were also able to then take a subset of that team and assign them to a geothermal project. So looking at their some different geothermal prospects, and at the same time, they had to functionally um, look at the skills that were required in the geothermal space, look at what they had that was existing and applicable, and then identify the gap. And we help them with some training in terms of developing those people. So, yeah, that key takeaway is that transferable skills uh, can be applied, and ultimately, it's much more efficient for companies to leverage their internal talent, come up with strategies to develop new skills around that delta that we discussed. So those are just some of my, I guess, recent, based on some recent conversations, some trends that I've been seeing.
Yeah, cool. It's an exciting time.
Absolutely, it certainly is. We have some questions that have come in, Ron. I don't think you can see them, but I can see
I
them.
can't now.
So I guess the best way to manage this, I've written some of these down. I've got some some thoughts on some of them, and then if
Mhm.
you want to jump in as well.
Yeah, sure.
So one of the first questions that we saw. So this goes to the slide for what's the worst that could happen. I've seen some similar slides, but I haven't seen what is the least that could happen. For individuals, companies, or countries, I'd think we'd want to see a balanced risk view before committing to programs for new jobs and training. And so I'll take a stab at this one first, Ron.
Sure.
So I think that slide really does highlight some of the things that we're already seeing in terms of the impact of global warming, right? And so stronger hurricanes, flood risk, all the things that are happening weather-wise, and some of the risks to low-lying um, land and islands and things like that. But I think what we're seeing really again over the last 6 months or so is that countries, companies, individuals, they're all reevaluating that a bit. They're reevaluating some of the commitments they may have made over the last 5 years when it comes to energy transition and otherwise. And something else that's really interesting. One thing that I guess I'm hearing more of is it's not just energy transition. It's kind of a shift to energy addition. So we need all types of energy in our energy mix, and the
Yeah.
transition is going to um, require all types of energy sources. So that's interesting. But I think when you go back to that reevaluation, um, it really comes down to a few different discussions. I think there's discussions on risk tolerance. I think there's some discussions in some case on the social environmental responsibility, and I think there's some discussions ultimately on profitability, right? And so in all those cases, I would say that ultimately it goes back to what those costs are associated with those programs, um, and ultimately where companies are going to invest. And with that investment, that will then drive again that the talent acquisition conversation, looking at workforce development as well. So really good question. The follow up
Yeah,
there.
before you
Sorry.
finish on that one, there
Yeah.
is one point on that. It's actually a really good question. What's the least that could happen? If you look at Moody's Insurance, what they have done is they've done a risk analysis by country, and what they found is that the risk is not the same for every country. Say, for example, you're in mainland US. Uh, the risk to mainland US is very, very different to the risk to Vanuatu. Vanuatu, it's low-lying island. They're pretty much going to be wiped out. But if you look at the analysis worldwide, and I have got the information somewhere on my laptop, um, basically the richer countries with a developed economy are generally at a lower risk than the poorer countries. So that's again, it's what sort of responsibility have we got? But to be fair, I think that what's going to happen is that the more developed countries, um, don't have the same impetus for this change. So the developed countries they're not going to see the same amount of flooding, um, although there are issues with climate change, with with these precipitation problems. But the thing is that if you had the same issue that you had in Texas recently, if you had that, let's say, in Bangladesh, it would probably be a heck of a lot worse. So
Yeah,
when you say,
and I think that what you spoke to is some of the analysis and the risk reporting that's being done by some of those firms. It speaks to the kind of, I guess, second comment or follow up question that was from that attendee, was that the question is, do we as industry or governments have that risk data so we can make fully informed decisions, right? And without a downside case, it could be difficult to optimize. So I think, to your point, Ron, there's some information that's out there, and I think there's a lot of
yeah,
firms, particularly, in the insurance and financial world, that are looking and assessing this. And I think that's also that goes back to kind of the discussion on, ultimately profitability and risk tolerance
yeah,
for companies.
very well. But if anybody wanted to find it, have a look on Moody's Insurance. They've got some pretty good information online. And if you want to look at the actual risk value for where you live, um, it's out there. Wood Mackenzie has some good stuff too.
Okay. So next question. So over the last 5 years, investment in solar, wind, batteries, etc., um, have been terrible. So despite cheerleading, when do you think it'll be profitable to invest in renewables? And so my, I guess my response to that would be, that's I think a lot of people are looking for that answer, right? So
Yeah.
ultimately, uncertainty in the market. Um, looking at countries that committed to emissions reduction targets, um, they really approached. Um, I've got some feedback on your end, Ron. If you wouldn't mind muting for a second.
Yeah, sure.
Um, so countries that committed to these emission reduction targets, they really approach incentives two different ways, right? So subsidy or penalty. So subsidies are ultimately designed to drive investment into that industry, which that investment in turn helps advance technologies, build out infrastructure, and ultimately helps grow the sector. And then you would have some organic, um, basically costs would come down organically, because that industry or that subsector of an industry is built up with stronger supply chain, more vendors available, creating new technologies, things like that. Um, Now, that said, the flip side of that is penalty, right? And so, um, with a penalty based incentive system, that really comes down to, um, really the emitter, right? And what are they going to do about it? So the shift of that investment, right, shifts a bit. But either way, companies will need to invest either to avoid penalty or to gain subsidy, in that sector. Now that said, what we've seen again in the last 6 months, a lot of different uncertainty in that space, right? Incentives moving, shifting, and in some cases, um, programs or projects being canceled. So what I would say to the the short answer of that is you need more certainty in the market. With certainty creates more solid financial models, and then those financial models allow for more sound, I guess, investment analysis and decision.
Yeah, there is something else with that, another dimension. And that dimension is that the rate of change of technology. And I mentioned earlier to you that just yesterday I got an email in Australia. They've just trialed a new form of hydrogen production that does not use an electrolyzer. They use a catalyst. And what they're using is a solar concentrating tower with a heliostat at the top, and that actually beams the heat down onto the catalyst, brings it up to over 1,000 degrees C. And that is, in the trials anyway, that's actually shown really high hydrogen production rates. And that could get rid of a lot of the problems associated with hydrogen production. But that's just one of them. It's happening all the time.
Yeah, I think, and again, that kind of goes back into the investment in new sectors, new technologies. Um, the technology costs and the infrastructure costs seem to be some of the biggest hurdles, for advancing these industries, and so, um, but it takes money to make money. I guess is the easiest way to say that, right? So
True.
the I guess the last, well, we have two more questions that I see. So um, question, Ron, I think we could probably both tackle this. So, what is the impact of policy changes by major countries, for example, the U.S. and China, on energy transition? Do you think the renewable energy will continue to receive government subsidies and support? Um, I can speak a bit from the U.S. perspective, if to start, I guess.
Yeah, go for it.
You know,
Yeah.
yeah, it's so it really is. It's very dynamic across countries, right? Because different countries have a lot of different variables and factors in terms of how they look at energy transition, how they're going to support it, not support it, fund it, et cetera. But I think what you've seen recently with the legislation that passed over the last week in the U.S. is that some incentives have been cut, and some have remained or been strengthened. So in some cases, it's a shift of that investment, or a shift in those tax credits, or growing those tax credits. And I think that's one of the things that you'll see at kind of the micro level, if you will, or at the country specific level. But I think at the same time, you see some balance in that. And so if hey, there's less investment, less incentive in the U.S. markets for solar or wind. Look at other markets like the UK and Europe, which you see um, continued investment, right? So I think what you'll see is over time it may change region to region, country to country, but net investment is going to continue to go up in these technologies because again, we're talking about energy addition. You're talking about a growing demand for energy, not only in existing countries that are looking to add new forms of energy for the reduction of their carbon footprint, et cetera, but also looking at the developing world and bringing affordable and reliable power to folks that don't have it right now, energy accessibility, if you will. So.
Yeah, I think we better move on. We've only got about a minute left.
Okay, well, that's good because the last question is, how can I get these slides?
Well, anyone who's registered will be sent a copy of the PDF.
All right.
I'm sure
Well,
we can do that.
there we go. So, um, I guess Ron, for you, any closing words, remarks?
Um, no, just that we've covered a lot of ground here, and I think that the one thing to bear in mind is that this is a process that does work. People are actually using this, but the thing is, keep your eye on the ball because the ball is moving and the technologies are changing, and that's the big issue for me.
Okay. Well, I guess to close out on my end, I think my key takeaway and kind of the message I guess we have for our customers, clients, and folks we collaborate with is that it takes all of us, right, in terms of understanding how we move towards net zero targets, um, you know, looking at new opportunities, but ultimately with these opportunities and with this investment in new energy sectors, it's an opportunity for people. It's an opportunity for jobs, and it's an opportunity for people to grow in their careers, to gain new skills, and ultimately better themselves. And so we all play a part in that. We here at the Competency Alliance at Petro Skills, Net Zero Skills, Renewable Skills are here to work and engage with you. So if you have any questions on anything we covered, feel free to get in touch with Ron or myself. We'd love to tell you a little bit more about what we're doing, and we'd like to understand how we might be able to help you. So, with that, thank you all for attending. Certainly appreciate it, and we look forward to either seeing you in subsequent webinars or talking to you in person. Thanks a
Yeah,
lot.
look out for them because we're going to be doing more of these webinars. Thank you, everyone.